Okay, this is going to be a presentation on learning target number 1 in cell reproduction and mitosis. This is going to be a presentation about something called the cell cycle, and what we see here is just some pictures. This is not an animation, this is an actual picture of a cell going through the cell cycle, and this is an animation of the cell cycle itself. You guys are going to need to make a notes sheet. So please get out your notebook now if you have not already. And you should make modified Cornell notes that look something like this. It will have this title on the top. It'll have a page number over here. Then you're going to have these prompts along the side. And these are the things that you should have notes on and that you will be responsible for knowing in class and which you will see on an assessment. So let's review quick. First of all, if you remember back to our unit on cells, we gave you a couple of parts of the cell theory that said that cells are the basic unit of life and that all living things are made of cells. So what does this mean? This means that in order for life to grow, develop, heal wounds, or even to create new life, we need more cells. If it's the basic unit of life and if all things are made of them, then if any of these things are going to happen, more cells need to be created. Okay, so if we're going to grow, if we're going to exist, life requires more cells. That's a pretty basic idea. Life requires more cells, so we need more cells to grow, develop, and heal. So where do these extra cells come from? Understanding that is an understanding of the cell cycle. Here's a quick diagram of the cell cycle. Don't draw this one, you'll see a better one later. But look at the main parts. There's this G1, S phase, G2, mitosis, and they go in a cycle except for the few cells that cease division, that never divide, and we'll talk more about those at the end. But every other cell goes through this cycle. The cell cycle is defined as this. It describes what cells are doing at different stages of their life. And here's some of the things that cells might need to do. They might just need to carry out normal cell functions. Okay. Some other things cells are going to need to do would be replicating DNA. We just learned about DNA replication, and that makes it possible for cell division in the first place. They might need to grow so that they can divide. They might need to get bigger. They do need to at times divide up the 2 copies of DNA that they replicated. And finally, the last step, if they're going to fully go through the cycle and go through cell division, they need to divide one cell into 2 cells. So here's a better diagram, or a more clear diagram of the life cycle of a cell, the cell cycle. And it's divided into 3 main stages. The first is interphase. Okay, and interphase is this large blue part that goes almost all the way around. It's the main part of the life of a cell. Almost all of the life of a cell, the cell is in interphase. And interphase has some smaller pieces. There's a G1 part, there's an S part, there's a G2 part, and for right now, just notice that these are smaller pieces of the whole thing, and I'll explain in a little bit what those parts do. You'll also notice the small part of the wedge down here, which is not part of interphase. And what this is mitosis, okay, and a separate part called cytokinesis. And these are kind of their own topics. So we have interphase with its G1, S, G2, and then mitosis and cytokinesis. Now let's look at these in a little bit more detail. Let me pull some of these out so we're not looking at too many things at once. And let's begin with one cell right here. We're not looking at this cell, we're just looking at this one right here. And let's say it's entered G1, or it is in G1. G1 is the biggest part of all cells' life. It's 90% of the life cycle of most of a cell is made up of G1. So this picture doesn't really do it justice. If this was to show 90%, almost the whole circle would be G1. But you should get the idea it's the largest stage. The cell grows during this stage, and it carries out normal cell functions. So at this point, next to the diagram, which you should have put in your notes, you should be writing down what happens in G1 of interphase. Okay. So it's carrying out normal functions, like if it's a muscle cell, it's being muscle. If it's a kidney cell, it's being kidney, and so on. Second phase is the S phase, the S part of interphase. And during this part of the cell cycle, DNA replication occurs. Now the cell's getting ready to divide. Cells don't need to replicate their DNA unless they're going to make another cell. So they replicate the DNA so that that new cell can get a complete set of the DNA. Now we have G2 of interphase. And here, G, in this case, basically stands for growth. The cell is going to grow so that it's big enough to divide into two and still, be two sort of reasonably sized cells. Then we have mitosis, and this is mitosis right here. Okay, so draw an arrow to mitosis. It's when the two copies of the DNA that were made during replication here in the S phase get divided up. And then the last stage, which is the completion of the cell cycle, cytokinesis, the cell divides. And that's why here we see two cells. Because at the end of this little piece, right here, the mitotic phase, we have two cells. And then each of those cells begin G1 and start interphase, and the cycle continues. Now, you should also understand why cells would go through this whole cell cycle in the first place. Some cells never complete the life cycle. They never go through the cell cycle. They stay in G1. They're created usually when you were a fetus or when you were very young, and they stay that way forever. What does that mean? That means they never complete DNA, this should say DNA replication, the S phase, so they never do that phase, and they never go through cell division, mitosis and cytokinesis. So they never divide. So why should you care? Why would this be important for you to know about? Well, what that means is that cells that never go through DNA replication, these cells are never going to be replaced. If you lose them, if they die for some reason, they're gone forever. So what are some examples of these? These are cells that are pretty important not to lose. Heart cells, nerve cells, that's like your brain and spinal cord. This is why somebody with a broken back or who breaks their spinal cord never walks again, because their nerves can't heal. Or if you have brain damage from, using drugs or a head injury, you're never going to get those cells back. Cells of the eye, if they get damaged, they can't regrow. So some cells never leave G1 and complete the cell cycle again. On the other hand, some cells regularly complete the cell cycle. So what does that mean? Well, that means they divide often. Okay? Why is that important to you? Well, these are cells that your body uses to grow or when you're injured to heal injury. So what are some examples of those? Bone cells. They grow pretty quickly. Just because they seem like they'd be these hard cells doesn't mean they don't grow. They do grow. That's why you grow. So do your muscle cells. They can also heal themselves if they're broken or injured. And skin cells are constantly replacing themselves, and that's why you can heal yourself after a cut. So cells that go through the cell cycle often, go through mitosis and cytokinesis, are important cells for healing and growth and development. Okay, so that's what you need to know for now about the cell cycle. You can expect a quick assessment on this topic when you come into class, and thank you very much.